When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
COVID action!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
COVID action!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
COVID action!
And when do we want it?
Now!
Okay, thanks everybody. Terry?
Down with the mic.
No. Andrew?
Ashley Berry from Islington.
I'm Terry from Islington. I'm Amanda Bentham. I am teaching. Hi, I'm Daisy. I'm from COVID Action and I'm from Harrington.
I'm Joseph Healy, and I'm from COVID Action, and I'm from Southwark, so this is quite near my neck of the woods.
Admin, COVID Action, Presbyterian. Never been there.
Ian, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Charles Persinger. I'm from the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice.
I'm Sue Boston, and I'm with COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice.
Okay, welcome everybody on this nice, sunny, late summer's evening. We've got lots of breezes to blow away the particles. So we're here gathered at the National COVID Memorial Wall. And the thing that always strikes me when I walk along this wall are the sheer number of names and hearts on it. And when you walk to the end, which takes about 10 minutes, you realise the scale of the tragedy which is happening. I mean, the tragedy which is fairly unparalleled actually in British history. It's worth remembering that more Londoners died from COVID than died in... And more Londoners died from COVID than died in the entire Blitz. So just to put that into perspective. So, you know, it's a number which is inconceivable really. It's only when you come to a monument like this, and long may it remain a monument, is when you gather what the scale of the tragedy was, the sheer numbers, and you read some of the stories along the wall and the dedications from family members. Now, I've been here a number of times, and I remember the first time I came, I found it really astounding. And I think I tell people always to come down here and just see it for themselves. So I've gathered here this evening from COVID Action to remind people that hashtag COVID is not over, although there are a number of people who want to pretend that it is. There's a lot of gaslighting going on from the government and its allies in the right-wing press, and there's still the attempt to cover over everything and make the whole discussion disappear from public view. So we've got a number of speakers here tonight from various people with links to the campaign, and people who've been working hard over the last 2.5 years to try and put in place protections and remind people that the danger persists. So first I'm going to ask Coral Jones from Doctors in Unite. Doctors in Unite have been doing sterling work throughout the whole pandemic. And we're down here in April. Coral was here in April when we had International Workers' Memorial Day. So Coral, welcome.
So I'm here representing Doctors in Unite. Doctors in Unite has been fighting right from the beginning to have COVID recognised as an aerosol spread, not doctors or something to do with not washing hands or all the things that the government is trying to say to everybody's attention. And there's Doctors in Unite with the Hazards campaign. We're actually written a comprehensive guide on making meetings safe. So and the height of Storm Eunice on the 18th of February, 4 people died. And so we know these people's names, we know how old they were, where they lived and how they died. On the same day, 157 people died of COVID. But these people are nameless and unacknowledged. So COVID deaths and illness have been pushed out of the public mood by a complicit press, a government in denial which refuses to take responsibility and has used the COVID crisis to enrich their friends instead of saving lives. We've been abandoned to COVID because we now have our freedom. Abandoning all protective measures is a political choice that does not follow the science, and it is dangerous. This is not acceptable. The message of today is that COVID has not gone away. We must demand action. We don't need lockdowns, but what we do need are public health measures. Local council run test and trace, health and safety assessments for work with proper ventilation and HEPA filters, masks on public transport and in shops, and financial support to self-isolate. Vaccination is just a backup. It doesn't prevent deaths. It does prevent serious illness and some deaths, but it's not the answer to COVID. We want not one more COVID death. No matter who we are or where we are, we're all affected by this seemingly endless pandemic, and people's loss needs to be acknowledged. The Tories are trying to rewrite history, and all these people who have died or been bereaved will be hidden from history. The tossing aside of responsibility, diminishing the seriousness, where 100 deaths a day is seen as a victory and success, is a turning away from grief and the denial that of each heart can heal. The denial of 205,000 deaths doesn't make them go away. So please join us in demanding COVID action and protections now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Coral. And you mentioned safety in the workplace, and I'm a Unite member, and throughout the pandemic I was a shop steward, and one of the things I was campaigning very hard on was ensuring that we had a safe workplace and that we had proper ventilation, that we had testing and things like that. And the hazards campaign, which was mentioned by Coral, was a really important part of that, and has been working with the trade unions on workplace safety. Workplace safety remains a really important issue throughout this pandemic. So, is Tony O'Sullivan here?
Yeah. Can I just quickly suggest that we sort of reorganise so that the videos look better? So that in the videos it's clear that the speaker has people with them.
You want us to stand behind?
I don't. Maybe if the speakers stand a little bit further forward, people can come here.
This is all the good because I'm in the United Union as well.
Yeah, and the banner behind the speaker. Sorry, I would put the banner down. Just need to gather more so that
That love to the camera.
so the passers-by are shut out. Sorry for my
Angle.
thinking ahead for social media now. Is that frame? Love it.
Okay, so I just want to welcome Dr. Tony O'Sullivan from Our NHS Public. Again, a really important campaign, an ally of ours with whom we've been working very closely, so welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to your relaunch, and very best of luck with it. It's easy to trot out all the statistics, 200,000 people have died now, 100 people a day died in the last week, and yet it's what we do with those statistics that's really important. And what we're doing here is trying to organise against the government message that the pandemic is over, and indeed we have to organise against the government's message that they want the NHS to be over. As we know, the delay in the announcement of the public inquiry was cynical and quite deliberate. I think the chair of the public inquiry is someone that we probably have some hope in that she will do a decent job. although the jury's out on that. That remains to be seen. But I've heard, and I'm sure you all know, that the first public meetings of the inquiry will not be heard now until summer next year. And so there is no hope in hell of any serious conclusions before the next election. And that is just no mistake. With Johnson or without Johnson, with Truss or Sunak or without them, the Tories are going to try to get themselves off the hook. And you probably heard that something like, I may get the figure wrong, but something like £80 million has been spent already on booking the most expensive legal chambers in this country to represent all the dodgy government departments and their activities that are responsible for the tens of thousands of avoidable deaths. So, February 2021, Our NHS Public launched our People's COVID Inquiry, but then at that point there was a deafening silence about any public inquiry in the future, and that was not announced until nearly a year later, after incredible efforts by the COVID-19 bereaved families and others. And we had a really amazing inquiry with over 44 witnesses interviewed by Michael Mansfield and the panel. And our conclusion, or their conclusion, is that there was misconduct in public office. And that's a legal charge of a dereliction of duty of government officials to defend the public, to act in their interests, and to instill confidence into the public that the government will keep them safe. And we heard mountains of evidence from some of the best brains, including NHS activists, care workers, trade unionists, alongside public health experts and international experts in public health, health and safety, and social policy. And I think our People's COVID Inquiry and its conclusions of misconduct in public office, for me, is a touchstone against which we will measure whether the UK Public Inquiry passes muster. Our challenge now is to get some of the messages out already to prevent the government from exonerating itself during its woeful and deliberate performance in putting the economy and individual rich people's rights over and above the population. Sorry, I'm nearly finished now. The tragic events that have occurred are actually more than tragic events. They were made lethal on an incredible scale by the negligence of this government and its policies. And I hope that through collaboration, through COVID Action, through our alliance of campaigns of which you're part, the SOS NHS Alliance, which has 54 organisations coming into it, 16 national unions, and lots of campaigning organisations and professional bodies, that we will be able to sound the drum for the NHS and sound the drum for the 200,000 people and their families that have lost their lives and their loved ones over the last 2.5 years. So thank you very much for your action tonight and inviting me to speak.
Thank you very much, Tony. There was mention there of the bereaved families, and this monument beside which we're standing is of course really created by them and is tended by them, and in fact they come down to preserve it and work in it quite often. And we're privileged to have a speaker tonight from the campaign Bereaved Families for Justice. And we all know the scale of this tragedy, which has touched them on a really deeply personal level. So I'd like to welcome Sue Hill from Bereaved Families for Justice.
Died of COVID-19 Parents have died, children have died, friends and partners have died. We are the bereaved families left behind, and we have one simple aim: to save lives by learning lessons from the handling of the pandemic. We have lost the people closest to us, and we won't let the same thing happen to other families. The government isn't taking action until they learn from the mistakes of the past. People will continue to die. That is why we campaign for an inquiry into the government's handling of ON. We want to know what went wrong, who was responsible, and how we can make sure mistakes are never repeated. We have helped shape the inquiry, making sure it asks the right questions, and now we're fighting for bereaved. Family members to be front and centre of the inquiry. Economies recover, schools and universities will adapt. The death of a loved one is total and forever. We have suffered the most from the pandemic, and everyone from the inquiry to the government and the man on the street needs to learn from what we have all gone through. Thanks to our 6.5 thousand members, the inquiry is at last underway. But the inquiry is only step one. In the coming years, we will need the support of the entire COVID justice community to force the government to make changes and keep people safe. Our loved ones were let down. Our key workers were let down. We were let down. And we won't let this happen again. This is my father, who I lost in April 2020. Thank you for letting me speak today. Thank you.
So one of the unions that's been in the forefront of this struggle, of course, and again will be in the forefront with the schools now opening without any mitigations, protections and so on, is the NEU. And we're privileged to have Amanda Bentham here tonight from the NEU. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much, comrades. I think I want to start by first of all saying solidarity to CWU members on strike today, and solidarity with the RMT who are holding a rally over the river at Conference House. Solidarity with all NHS workers and key workers who worked through the pandemic to protect us all, who've been rewarded with real terms pay cuts, job losses and erosions in conditions that I think actually are potentially going to be deadly. So I'm a proud member of the NEU and I'm a rep for a workplace in Tower Hamlets. In January 2021, I'm very proud that my union used Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act to call for a closure and a walkout of schools because we did not believe it was safe to be teaching, it was not safe for our members, it was not safe for the children to be in schools. And I am very proud that we forced the government to call a lockdown and close the schools. The NEU has consistently called on the government to make schools safer. We provided advice to members on masks, on ventilation, on the use of CO2 monitors. And this summer with the GMB and the UCU, Unison and Unite, the NEU has introduced joint trade union guidance to ensure COVID safety before schools reopen. So things like risk assessments, vaccinations for children, ventilation programme, masks, PPE when it's needed, bringing back free testing for schools. I think that's so important for pupils to continue to have access to free testing, for all staff to have the same. And anyone who has a positive test or symptoms, obviously, to be able to stay home until they're clear. As I said, I work in Tower Hamlets, and my job is to work for a service where we work with children with SEND across schools and homes and other settings. And we know the cost of COVID under the Tories. We've lost members in Tower Hamlets to COVID. They are among the 570 plus education workers who have died from COVID. We lost some of our parents of pupils to COVID and council staff across the board. And so Tower Hamlets is a borough with the highest rate of child poverty, 51%. We have a very high number of multi-generational households living in very high density, overcrowded housing. Those from the South Asian descent are 3 times more likely to die from COVID. And the pandemic is of course far from over, and many schools, I think, will be fearing a looming health crisis this winter, as the NHS of course is already suffering. Because of the cost of living disaster, schools have not been protected from energy price hikes. Some schools are reporting now that they are facing £150,000 in their energy bills coming up annually. So how can schools afford to heat and ventilate schools this winter? And we're in the midst of a massive funding crisis already in education. We've got staff cuts, we've got rising numbers in classes. None of this is good in terms of COVID conditions. There are no cover staff, children's lives and their life chances are being blighted. And at the same time, the government is still forcing this high stakes testing regime. So we're back to GCSEs and they've suppressed the results for the children who've just gone through them. So along with rail and postal and university workers and barristers and people across the spectrum, the NEU will be balloting its members on pay in September. And we think the struggle for a real terms pay rise is also a struggle for decent, safe working conditions and learning conditions. And I think that what we should be demanding from our government is universal free school meals, vaccination programme for all our pupils of school age, proper ventilation, proper filters and proper heating in all our classrooms. We need to keep schools open, I think, to feed our communities and keep them warm. And lastly, I would just like to say solidarity to all the striking workers, all the NHS staff, and solidarity with the bereaved families from my union. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, and solidarity with the NEU. And now I'd like to call on Tacy, who's my comrade from the COVID Action Committee, to say a few words about our campaign.
Okay, thank you for coming, everyone. And I do think it's a really great coalition that we have here today. And like Tony was mentioning earlier, the SOS NHS coalition, I think is like a really great starting point for all of our COVID activism. So obviously, we're relaunching this campaign in the context of COVID being completely pushed out of public debate. Like, you will not see it on the front pages, and the only mention that the Tories are willing to give it is to compete between who can criticise the lockdowns the most as having been excessive and so on. And Liz Truss pledges that no matter what, there will never be another lockdown in this country, come what may. So obviously the fact that COVID has been so completely pushed out of public discourse is primarily due to an ideological offensive from the Tories that the media has taken part in, the capitalist class has taken part in, and from every section of the powerful people in this society, they are telling us that COVID is over and we have to go back to normal. And as it has been said, this campaign is not calling for a new lockdown, but this dichotomy of it's lockdown or nothing is absolutely ridiculous, and it's costing lives and it's costing health. But then there is also another reason that COVID has been pushed out of the headlines, and that is also because there is a new crisis on the way, the cost of living crisis and the economic crisis. But I think what we need to understand is that those are not separate issues, that the cost of living crisis and the economic crisis are so bound up with the disruption caused by COVID, from worker absences, from long-term long COVID. and obviously happening at the international level as well. But again, the only reason that they will mention that COVID isn't forward the cost of living crisis is because, oh, China did a lockdown, and therefore it's China's fault for doing a lockdown. That's why we have a cost of living crisis. And these are both crises of inequality. We know that COVID impacted lower income communities much worse. It impacted people of colour much worse. And the cost of living crisis, of course, will be the same. Another way that they are connected, of course, is that the cost of living crisis will make the COVID crisis worse. Because if people's incomes are constrained, if people can't get a pay rise, are you going to be able to fork out for tests, for masks? Are you going to be able to take time off work? No, you're not. So these are absolutely connected crises, and I think we have to be making those connections, making that clear to everyone. Another way they're connected is, of course, that they are both linked to the climate crisis. COVID, this campaign has been making this point for a long time. COVID came out of a zoonotic spillover, most probably, which is to do with ecological devastation, and that is also the same thing that is enabling these energy companies to make a killing while everybody else suffers. So, we're relaunching just as the Tory party are about to do the same. I think that's very important context, you know, that the political terrain that we operate on is always changing, and so we are responding to these changes as we go along in our movement. But I think at the same time, we also need to be orienting ourselves towards this general social crisis that COVID is a part of. The cost of living movement that is emerging is going to be really powerful. The strike wave that is emerging is going to be really powerful. And I think, you know, if health is wealth, then we refuse to be poor. So we don't live with other infectious and deadly diseases. We protect ourselves through test and trace, through self-isolation, through making sure that the environments that we work and live in are safe. And for an airborne virus like COVID, we need ventilation and we need masking in public spaces. We support a vaccines plus approach, and we want to make sure that boosters are widely accessible to everybody this autumn. The Tories have presided over 200,000 deaths. We say no more. The new Prime Minister, when she comes in, must take a different approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. A good point you made about the new government coming in, although it's been the same bloody Tory party for the last 12 years. Each time they change, like the Time Lords, they pretend that they've nothing to do with the preceding government. So it's sort of a bit like the Russian Matryoshka dolls. There's always another one inside. So I want to, we would have had Florence Eshalomi, who is the local MP here, Labour MP for Vauxhall, was going to come and speak to us tonight, but unfortunately she's been taken ill. However, she has sent her support and she has sent a statement which I'm going to ask Carmen from COVID Action to read out. Carmen.
Thank you. So this is from Florence Eshalomi MP here today. I'm sorry I could not be there tonight, but I pay tribute to our NHS workers and everyone fighting to get them a better deal. When I walk along the COVID Memorial Wall, it breaks my heart to see so many families torn apart by the loss of a loved one from COVID-19. It's vital that we remember that. It's vital that we remember that this disease is still amongst us, continuing to add more heart to the wall and continuing to take loved ones away from their friends and family. Through my work on monkeypox, I am seeing the same mistakes that were made at the start of the pandemic from a flaming government that simply isn't doing enough to protect the NHS. This will add pressure onto our frontline workers after 2 desperately difficult years. And the new Prime Minister must act to get a grip on this situation. Florence Eshalomi MP for Vauxhall.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm just going to finish with a poem which I wrote called COVID in Memoriam. And I had in my mind's eye this very wall here where we stand, but also the House of Horrors on the other side of the river, just opposite. And I want to, this is in memory of those who died, but also the reasons why they died. Along the dark waters of the Thames stands the memorial. Long it stretches along the wall bordering the hospital, where many it commemorates spent last hours, alone, terrified, struggling for life with every breath. Thousands of hearts adorn its surface, some once bright red, now a pale shade of pink. Others gone so faint, like memories of the lives spent in safer times. Names given meaning by messages of love. A dear father taken too soon, missed by all. Taken by a visit to the pub. Sorry, a visit to the shop. A drink in the pub. A chat in a neighbour's house. A queue in the post office. Everyday acts innocent before, now poisoned with death's sharp arrow. Nurses, bus drivers, shop assistants laboured through the lockdowns, could not escape the locking down of life, of breath. On the opposite bank of the Styx sits the Grand Palace, site of endless talk and lies, whose masters watched indifferent as wretches struggled, gasping desperately for air, clutching at the straw. For them, the dollar and the pound and the sandwich shops, the heaving pubs, the cut and thrust of commerce and commute, the centre of a universe of Moloch, which suffering and loss do not touch, nor tears, nor entreaties move from its predetermined axis. The graves stand silent, the mourners gone. Accusingly, the monument stares across, waiting the moment of truth, when accounts will be settled, and murderers' names writ large in blood upon its tragic surface. So now I think we're going to do a little bit of agitprop. We have some masks to distribute. FFP2 masks, I believe. And we're going to head up towards, I think probably towards the hospital. The general view is that the bridge is going to be covered and be news tourists taking lots of pictures of Big Ben. So I think